Always a fun day out on the water when you can get behind the helm and get out there on the boat until things go wrong, kind of like this crew found out up in Lake Massacoba up in New Hampshire this week when they got their tune just a little too close to the falls and wound up going over. Fortunately, no injuries were reported and this crew was able to successfully be rescued. Let's hope the rest of our boaters we feature this week have the same luck as we dive into this week's episode of Boating News of the Week. Our first story to make the boating news this week is going to take us up to Gloucester, Massachusetts, to the home of the very famous Cut Bridge, which can be seen in these images here as a boat was going out of the river into Gloucester Harbor when all of a sudden the vessel exploded. At the time of the incident, there were two people on board the small recreational vessel. The vessel was heading down the river. The men had just loaded it up with approximately 80 gallons of fuel and were heading out for a day of fishing with their dog when all of a sudden the engine exploded. Fortunately, the two men were able to successfully jump off the vessel into the water and able to use a ladder nearby to climb out of the river. The dog actually remained on the vessel after the explosion, but fortunately a Good Samaritan vessel in the area saw the incident occur and was able to approach the boat and pull the dog off to safety. Once fire officials arrived on the scene, they were able to move the vessel to a more remote, marshy area where they were able to actually put the blaze out. The vessel has been pulled from the water, but this crew was pretty lucky that this actually occurred still inshore. It would have been a whole lot worse if it would have happened once they actually got offshore fishing. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to Belgium, where this was the scene this past week when Norwegian Cruise Line's newest vessel, the Norwegian Prima, found itself in a little bit of trouble when it encountered a heavy windstorm while docked at port. The vessel was docked in Zeeburg, Belgium this past Saturday when the vessel broke free from several mooring lines and began to drift away from the pier during heavy wind. Several guests aboard the cruise ship wound up capturing these video images showing the vessel being moved enough so that both gangways, first the forward and then the aft, were actually dragged off the dock and wound up falling into the water. Fortunately, no guest or crew members were on the gangways at the time of the incident and no injuries were reported that were related to this incident. But it really is a wild scene to watch to see the actual cruise ship mooring lines wind up snapping. These lines are designed for intense pressure just to show you how strong the winds were on this day. Crew quickly jumped into action to attempt to get the vessel back over to the dock. 3 tugboats were actually called in to assist with this as well. And fortunately, crews were able to get the vessel back over to the berth safely. During the time of the incident, wind gusts were recorded to be as high as 50 miles an hour. Fortunately, most of the guests who were traveling on board the cruise ship actually had departed the vessel and were on land, as the vessel was enjoying its last port of call during its 10-day cruise. Guests as they returned to the vessel were held on the pier until the Norwegian Prima was safely secured with new mooring lines and new gangways in place. The sunken gangways were retrieved at a later date and time. Now, this wasn't the only cruise ship to have incidents recently, as these images come from the Ruby Princess. The Ruby Princess was returning to San Francisco's Pier 27 from an Alaskan cruise when all of a sudden the ship encountered what the Coast Guard is calling a hard landing into the pier, and the damage can be seen here as the hull is actually punctured of the cruise vessel. At this time, an investigation is underway to try and determine the exact cause of the incident, but at this time it's believed wind and high currents to be the predominant factors. The vessel was delayed several days as repairs were made, but eventually after 3 days of repairs, the vessel was able to get back underway for its next scheduled cruise. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to be one of the most interesting rescue stories we've ever seen, and it's going to kind of take us off the coast of Costa Rica. And the reason I say kind of, the way this unfolds, a vessel was fishing over 1,000 miles off the Costa Rican coast when all of a sudden a member on board the vessel winds up getting injured. They do send out a distress call and the Coast Guard winds up responding to the call, but quickly realizes they have no vessels anywhere near this area to be able to assist. The Coast Guard passes the call over to the 129th Rescue Wing, and the very next morning, Air Force HC-130 takes off with a Guardian Angel pararescue team on board from Moffett Air Force Base. The crew winds up jumping out of the plane over 1,000 miles offshore loaded with medical gear and wind up saving the man who is now in stable condition. Just shows you how far the Coast Guard and other rescue squads will go to save mariners' lives. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Boating News of the Week. If you ever see anything crazy happening out on your waterways, be sure to hit us up on Facebook or Instagram and let us know, and you might see your stories over here, just like Dwayne Ramos and Lisa Lovey did this week. And if you guys haven't already, go ahead and drop an anchor on the subscribe button here.